When the sun was still a shy visitor over the tall, wet grass, the soldier would leave his trench. Emerging from the tunnel mouth, he'd be greeted by a sky heavy with mist and cloud. The wind, if it stirred at all, would be carrying the sweet scent of honeysuckle from the fields beyond no man's land. At first, he wouldn't see much movement. The enemy had retreated into their own trenches before dawn, leaving the battlefield a stage for only the lonely, grey shapes of artillery and the scurrying forms of the digging and sapping companies, the pioneers. Theirs was a race against the enemy. While one group dug out the old, another group would race back to the dugout to fill the newly exposed section with sandbags. In this way, they kept the underground labyrinth from collapsing. They also dug latrines, cleared the dead from the battlefield, brought up supplies, and did all the other necessary work that kept the army supplied and fed. Trenches were not the only place where the soldiers went during the day. Sometimes they ventured into the battered villages nearby. They'd peer cautiously around corners, checking for snipers, and then scrounge for food, looking for anything to eat. They might find a can of meat, a tin of vegetables, or a sack of flour. And when night fell, they would return to the trenches, bearing their treasures and sharing their spoils with the others. Evening was a quieter time in the trenches. With the daylight, the enemy would stir. So now the men sat or lay about, resting. They talked in hushed voices, swapping stories, catching up on gossip, writing letters home, or shaving. For some, the evening was a time for religious observance. Chaplains carried on through the war, offering prayers and words of comfort. They celebrated Christmas in the trenches, too, with church services, carols, and even theatricals. When the service was over, there would be a moment of silence as the men contemplated the far-off, silent bells of England. Then, as midnight chimed, they broke into cheers and sang songs, celebrating the new year and their own resilience. They slept where they could, sometimes in the trenches, huddled together for warmth. They dreamt of home, of warm fires, smiling faces, and open fields. Some slept in billets, which might be a house or a barn. They shared their beds with lice, rats, and the ghosts of those who'd been wounded or killed there before them. The air in the billets was thick with the smells of stale waste and chamber pots. The floors were often littered with straw, and the furniture was usually a chest, a table, or a chair. Occasionally, they'd be lucky enough to find a billet near the front line, and then their evenings would be filled with the drone of snipers and the flicker of flame as shells sailed overhead. But they'd be spared the worst of the artillery barrages, the thunderous booms that shook the ground and rattled their bones. Those further behind, in relative safety, might hear the explosions and still carry on with their game of cards or But for those close to the front, it was impossible to ignore the incoming fire. Men would dive for cover as shells landed, kicking up a spray of mud and earth. After a barrage, there would be an eerie silence as the men checked themselves and each other for injuries. Then they would start to dig. They dug and dug. They made elaborate networks of tunnels and rooms beneath the battlefields of France and Flanders. They carved out kitchens, sleeping quarters, first aid stations, and even latrines. The tunnels were dark and dank, smelling of stale waste and damp earth. The air was thick with the sound of dripping water and the cries of rats darting through the darkness. At times, it seemed as though the men were fighting more against the elements and the creatures that shared their subterranean world than against the enemy. One thing the soldiers did not do was shower. They washed their clothes as best they could, but they rarely washed themselves. They were rarely clean. Their bodies were covered in a perpetual coating of grime and sweat, and they smelled like stale waste and dirty clothes. Life in the trenches was not just difficult, it was monotonous, tiring, cold, wet, and depressing. It was also absurd. Soldiers learned to laugh at the unexpected absurdities that punctuated their days. A German plane flew overhead, dropping its bombs. A dog ran across no man's land, dodging bullets and bringing down a wounded pigeon with it. A cat stalked through the long grass, chased by a terrier. All the while, the men in the trenches watched and waited, caught between the drama of war and the banality of their daily existence. Rats, gas, and rain. A trench soldier's hour by hour. Imagine yourself waking before the sun, not by alarm, but by the cold, a kind of cold that clings not just to your skin, but slips into your bones, slow, persistent, and damp. The sky is a pale smear above the trench, grey and dull, like wet linen, hung too long on the line. You are in northern France. It is 1960. The trench where you sleep is not neat, nor clean, nor dry. The wooden planks beneath you, called duckboards, creak faintly underfoot, slick with morning moisture and something darker. The residue of too many weeks of rain and footsteps and decay. You pull yourself up slowly, legs stiff. The walls beside you, packed earth reinforced with sandbags and rotting timbers, glisten with condensation. Overhead, the sky begins to lighten. But there is no sunrise here, only the gradual lifting of gloom. You reach for your boots. They are wet, always heavy, and you brace yourself as you slip them on. Your toes feel soft, water. You wriggle them and feel the squish of old mud. There is no real hope of drying them. You stopped hoping for that weeks ago. Somewhere to your left, a voice coughs a rasping, wet sound. To your right, a man is lighting a cigarette, cupping it carefully against the breeze. The paper flares briefly. He draws in the smoke with a quiet sigh. It is one of the few small comforts allowed. Breakfast, if it arrives, is cold. It comes in a dented tin can, passed down by a ration party. Perhaps it's bully beef again, salted and dense, or maybe hard biscuits in a smear of jam. Your fingers are stiff as you eat, your breath steaming as you chew. The taste is bland, the smell faintly metallic. And there are rats. They scamper along the trench walls, bold and fat. They feast on whatever is left and eat, and sometimes even on things that are not food. Their eyes glint in the dim light. You swat one away from your boots with a half-hearted gesture. It returns moments later. You no longer care. Time moves slowly here. You may be assigned sentry duty, standing watch over the edge of the trench, peering through the periscope for any movement in no man's land. The periscope fogs with your breath. You wipe it again and again. The view beyond is flat and empty mud. Barbed wire. Craters filled with murky water. The silence is deceiving. At any moment a shell could fall, or a sniper could find a silhouette. But in this moment, nothing happens, and that is its own kind of strain. Later, a gas drill. The sergeant calls out, his voice low and tired. You reach for your gas, mask clumsy. The mask smells of rubber and mold. You strap it over your face, your breath loud in your ears, as it fogs the eyelid. Practice. Always practice. Because one day, it will not be a drill. And then there's the latrine, a shallow pit, sometimes nothing more than a bucket or a trench offshoot lined with a bit of plank. Privacy is rare, sanitation rarer still. The smell drifts constantly, lingering over everything. You grow used to it, or at least learn to stop reacting. By afternoon, the trench feels closer. The walls seem to press in. The sky lowers. It rains against low and steady, as if it has nowhere else to go. Water slides down your collar, soaks into your wool. The mud rises again, swallowing the duckboards, oozing into your boots. Letters arrive somewhere in the midst of it all. A precious few words from home. Faded ink, careful script. A wife, a mother, a friend. News from a different world. A dog that had puppies. A neighbor who fell ill. The ordinary lives that go on without you. You fold the paper carefully, tuck it into the inner pocket of your jacket. It will grow damp, but you will read it again and again. At dusk, you prepare for stand-to the moment before night, when every soldier readies for a possible attack. You stand, rifle in hand, barely able to keep your eyes open. The horizon is gray. The enemy is silent. You wait, and nothing happens. Again, later still, the night settles over the trench like a heavy blanket. Visibility drops. Fires are not allowed. A single match, struck carelessly, could cause lives. So the darkness becomes total thick. In closing, you may be assigned patrol. You step out quietly, crouching low, boots sinking into the muck of no man's land. The smell here is different, more bitter, more still. Somewhere, something unseen shifts beneath your foot. You pause, hold your breath, and step again. Hours pass. You return, cold, exhausted, unchanged. The night ends as it began, with wet boots and hunger and the sound of shells falling somewhere beyond your reach. And tomorrow, you will do it all again. The Christmas truce let us drift now, away from the constant shiver of rain and the hum of shells, to a night that, for a moment, interrupted the rhythm of war. It is December 1914. The Western Front stretches across France and Belgium, a jagged scar of mud, misery, and mechanical violence. For months, soldiers on both sides, British, French, German, have been locked in an unrelenting stalemate. And yet, amidst this bleak tableau of barbed wire and frostbitten silence, something rare and unexpected began to stir. This is the story of the Christmas truce. A quiet moment in a war defined by noise. Imagine the trench again, but this time it is colder, stiller. The mud is frozen, and breath fogs in the air. Frost crusts the sandbags. Snow settles lightly across the torn earth between the trenches, the space known as no man's land. The days are shorter now, and the nights longer. The war, for all its brutality, has paused ever so slightly for the season. No grand ceasefire has been declared. Orders have not changed, but something more subtle begins to happen. In certain places along the front, strange sounds rise from the enemy lines. Carols, soft at first. Just a single voice in the German trenches. Then, a chorus. Still knocked. Helig. Knocked. Silent night. Holy night. The melody drifts across the field. British troops, curious and confused, listen. Some reply with their own songs. The first Noel O come all. The faithful soon tentatively through the frost. There is laughter. Then applause. The next day, Christmas Eve, brings something even stranger. Signs begin to appear, crudely written on cardboard or boards, lifted over trench walls. You know, shoot. We know, shoot. In other places, Merry Christmas. Words from the other side, carried not by propaganda, but by hand and hope. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of your trench, rifle resting at your side, watching a soldier in grey slowly emerge from the opposite line. Hands raised. No weapon. Just a smile. He offers a wave. Another follows behind him, and then, cautiously, a British soldier climbs out as well. Soon, the unimaginable occurs. Men meet in the middle, not everywhere, not along every line, but in enough places that let us home would later confirm the event with quiet wonder. They shake hands, exchange cigarettes, some swap buttons or small tins of food. A few even share photographs of loved ones, pocket-sized reminders of lives paused by war. In some sectors, impromptu football matches spring up, played with battered leather balls, or even empty food tins. The goals are makeshift, the teams uneven, and the field riddled with craters. But the game is real. A moment of shared humanity played out under a grey, wintry sky. There is no grand declaration, no official sanction, only a sense, perhaps, that the war has taken enough, and for one sacred night, it would take no more. Letters from the time preserve the calm, reflective tone of soldiers bewildered by their own experience. One British rifleman wrote, "It all felt so strange. Men who just days ago tried to kill each other now stood talking like neighbors. We even helped them bury their dead. Imagine that. A day spent not in gunfire, but in quiet labor, gently wrapping bodies in blankets, reading aloud their names, when known, and placing them gently into the frozen earth. The war would soon resume, but for a handful of hours, something else prevailed. The commanders, of course, were less enthusiastic. Orders were issued to prevent fraternization. Discipline was threatened, but for those few soldiers who experienced the truce firsthand, it left an imprint far deeper than any reprimand. By the time New Year's came, the fighting had returned in full. Machine guns roared once again. The war's machinery groaned back to life. But the memory of that pause, that breath between battles would live on. Even today, in the stillness of a winter night, some remember the strange silence of Christmas 1914. A silence that was not born of fear. And now, as the smoke settles again across the front, we turn to what time has left behind. The physical remnants of trenches that, long after the last shot was fired, still hold the quiet echo of war. Trenches that still echo. Imagine walking through a quiet countryside, to the fields brushed by wind. The distant hum of bees, and trees whose branches reach without urgency toward a soft sky. Then, a dip in the earth. A narrow scar, overgrown with moss and weeds, lined by the remains of wooden planks, faint outlines in the soil. A trench. Still here, still whispering, long after the last gas shell drifted and the final boots marched away. The remnants of the Great War remain buried beneath the land preserved, not by design, but by mud, chance, and time. Let us now gently descend into these traces, not into noise or fear, but into quiet investigation, into the patient hands of archaeologists and historians, who have spent years unearthing the silent past, one boot heel, one spoon, one gas mask at a time. We begin in Belgium, near the small town of Ypres, where some of the war's most intense fighting occurred. Efforts have been underway for decades to uncover and preserve trench systems hidden beneath farmland and forest. Archaeologists here work with brushes and trowels, gently removing layers of time. They kneel beside rotted duckboards, bent rifle fragments, and helmets rusted into shape by a century of damp. Some trenches are astonishingly intact. In places like Bayernwald and Hill 62, reconstructed walkways follow the original snaking lines of communication, trenches and fire steps. The floor is uneven, the walls reinforced with corrugated metal or the remnants of sandbags, now petrified by the soil. They offer a rare view not of the war's drama, but of its daily stillness. These are the paths men walk to bring tea, to carry orders, to wait. Imagine standing in such a trench, your head just below the edge. Boards creak softly beneath your weight. You reach out to steady yourself, your fingers brushing a post carved with initials, scratched hurriedly, perhaps on a quiet evening before the storm returned. Each object found holds a story. Often, they are not dramatic stories. A rusted tobacco tin with flecks of tobacco still inside. A spoon, bent from frequent use. A comb with broken teeth. Personal items, intimate and quiet. They speak, not of war's strategy, but of its rhythm, of the routines that filled long hours between terror. In northern France, at sites like Vimy Ridge and Beaumont Hamel, entire trench networks have been preserved, some by design, others simply left untouched since the armistice. Grass has softened the edges, but the layout remains, winding warren of protection and passage. Preservation is not always planned. Sometimes, a farmer's plow strikes something hard, and the work of memory begins. Not long ago, a construction project unearthed an entire underground shelter fortified with timber, and filled with sleeping quarters, notebooks, even ink bottles, their contents long evaporated, their purpose still intact. The shelters, when found, are often eerily complete. Boot prints remain in hardened mud floors. Cupboards still hold rations, never eaten. Names are scrawled along the beams. Time has not erased them, it has simply hushed them. In some places, the soil still holds the remains of soldiers many unnamed. Their stories now pieced together by DNA, letters, or regimental badges found nearby. When discovered, these remains are treated with great reverence, laid to rest in quiet ceremonies, honored not for their victories, but for their presence, for having endured. Museums to hold echoes of the trenches. In Peronne, the Historia de la Grande Gare houses fragments of everyday trench life, letters never sent, game pieces carved from shell casings, small embroidered tokens sent from front to home. Each piece is an artifact of emotion, not just conflict. Boredom, longing, hope. And then there are the ghost trenches, seen not by eye, but by satellite and lidar, hidden beneath fields now green with wheat, patterns revealed only from the air, zigzagging faint lines that once channeled men toward danger. These are the scars. The land has not fully healed, and perhaps should not. There is comfort in this silence, in knowing that the ground remembers even when people forget, that the echo of a footstep or the scrape of a shovel still reverberates through time. So much of trench life was monotony, waiting, listening, worrying. And it is precisely this quiet that the preserved trenches now reflect. They do not shout. They do not reenact. They simply exist, mute witnesses to a war that was anything but quiet. And now, as the wind brushes through the tall grass above these buried corridors, let us step once more into contrast. Away from the earth, and into the drawing rooms where decisions were made, where comfort reigned, and where the lives of thousands were discussed over tea and cigars. The war had many fronts, some cold, some warm. Shall we go there now? Generals and drawing rooms, command from afar, far. From the trenches beyond, the shell-shocked forests and cratered fields, another world persisted, a world of polished boots and polished brass, of thick carpets, gleaming decanters, and the muted chime of distant clocks. A world not untouched by war, but removed from its mud and immediate. This was the realm of generals, of planners, of men who directed battles from drawing rooms and distant headquarters. Let us step quietly into this other theater. Imagine a manor house in the French countryside, requisitioned for use by the British High Command. Inside, the atmosphere is hushed but purposeful. The air carries the scent of pipe smoke and old leather. Maps are unrolled across long wooden tables, secured by weights, ink bottles, and tired hands. Gentlemen in tailored uniforms bend over them, murmuring in low tones, tracing lines with their fingers. Names like Passchendaele and Cambrai drift through the conversation, not yet blood-soaked memories, at possibilities. The mood is not frivolous, but neither is it frantic. There is an elegance here, even amid tension. Afternoon tea is still observed. China cups clink softly. Servants come and go in silence. The war is present on the papers, in the telegrams, in the furrowed brows, but it remains, for these men, largely conceptual, a matter of logistics, of schedules, of weather forecasts and supply lines. Some generals lived in near palatial headquarters. Field Marshal Haig, for instance, resided at one point in a chateau with high ceilings and grand staircases. Meetings were held beneath chandeliers. Orders were drafted at antique desks. At night the rooms fell silent but for the scratching of pens and the ticking of grandfather clocks. Outside, beyond the gardens and gates, war rumbled. But inside, the air remained still. This distance, both literal and emotional, was not born of callousness. Many commanders carried deep burdens, heavy with the knowledge that their decisions cost lives. Some visited the front, walking through trenches in clean uniforms, exchanging solemn words with weary men. But these visits were brief. The trenches were not places for extended stays, and so they returned to headquarters, to command trains, to country houses where information arrived as coded messages, and casualties were statistics in neat rows. In German command centers, the scene was similar, disciplined, calculated, and aristocratic in bearing. Officers dined on dark bread, smoked cigars, and discussed movements like a complex game. Their surroundings, while more austere, still bore little resemblance to the dugouts of their soldiers. A typical day in high command might begin with dispatches reports from multiple sectors, some incomplete, others conflicting. Briefings followed, filled with maps and speculation. Plans were refined, orders issued. Yet the true weight of these decisions often remained abstract. The mud, the cries, the confusion, they were filtered, translated into diagrams and estimates. Generals bore many names: Farshel, Ludendorff, Pershing, Haig. Some were brilliant tacticians, others were rigid. Most operated under crushing pressure from both military and political forces. Public opinion mattered, morale mattered, but the physical conditions their soldiers endured often remained unseen, and so a strange dissonance emerged. While men crouched in flooded dugouts, warmed only by tinned rations and the occasional cigarette, others dined on cooked meals in well-lit rooms. While orders were shouted over gunfire and the roar of barrages, they were whispered here, written in fine script, dispatched by courier or cable. Even in London and Paris, the war was present, yet distant. Politicians debated strategy beneath high ceilings. Ladies volunteered at hospitals. Evening papers delivered tallies of gains and losses over dinner tables. The war was a constant presence, but its texture, its taste and sound and weight varied wildly, depending on where one stood. It is easy to pass judgment from afar, to see this distance as indifference. But perhaps it is more complex. Perhaps the mind, too, must distance itself to manage the unmanageable. To guide vast armies, one must see the whole field, not just the mud beneath one's boots. And yet, the cost of that detachment was profound. Letters from soldiers spoke often of confusion, of not understanding the orders, of waiting for attacks that seemed senseless. And while generals explained these movements in feints, advances, the men experienced them as noise, mud, and fear. In this contrast lies one of the quiet tragedies of the war. Two versions of the same event, one drawn with pencil lines across a map, the other lived with trembling hands in the earth. Neither version is complete, but together they form a fuller picture. And now, as we move gently toward the end of our journey, let us pause once more in reflection. The trenches of the First World War were not just dug into the ground, they were carved into memory, into family stories, forgotten photographs, and the soil itself. Those who lived through them, whether soldier, nurse, officer, or farmer, endured a world that pulsed with fatigue and quiet dread. A world where time slowed, where routine was both lifeline and curse. Yet beyond the fire and the fear was a daily rhythm, the scrape of boots, the ritual of shaving in a tin mirror, letters folded carefully, bread shared, a song hummed, and now you too have walked a while with them. In silence, in curiosity, in calm. The world they knew was not ours, but some echoes remain, in the pause before sleep, in the quiet courage of ordinary lives. So as you drift now gently into rest, let these memories soften into dreams. The trenches are behind you, only stillness ahead.